Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Nigeria's election management body, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has come under intense criticism because of its perceived failure to deliver on its fundamental mandate, delivering mutually acceptable, less compromised, and largely credible elections to Nigerians. Recent post-election pronouncements of the Supreme Court of Nigeria would seem not to have helped INEC either, what with growing evidence of overvoting and other forms of electoral malpractice in some states of the Federation, a situation that has created complications for peaceful coexistence of the people and, by extension, the future of democracy in the country. For a look at what could be wrong and what needs to be done in terms of solution, we are now being joined from our Abuja studio by Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi, Director, Voter Education and Publicity, Independent National Electoral Commission. Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi, good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and good to see you again. Well, INEC just concluded rerun elections in 11 states and 25 constituencies across the country. But Nigerians are shocked that despite INEC's promise that, the process will be itch-free, we still had cases of, the old patterns of overvoting, of ballot snatching, of violence, or what has been described as electoral banditry, at least in one state, in Akwa Ibom State. Where does the problem really lie? Because I recall INEC did a review of the 2019 general elections, and we were told going forward, INEC has found solutions to many of these problems. But it looks like, INEC is overwhelmed.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know whether I'll agree with you that INEC is overwhelmed. I think some of the statements are very broad, very sweeping, and I wonder whether that is matched by the facts that have emerged, that we know them. There were 28 elections in 28 constituency elections in 11 states. The complaints refer only to 3 or 4 states. I don't think that's a particularly bad ratio. We are hoping for the day that we'll conduct elections where there will be no complaints. But it's a human exercise, and that being so, all sorts of dynamics are at play. And if you look at what happened in this last Saturday's elections, none really is attributable to anything INEC has done or failed to do. So basically, 4 instances are referred to. In Issa local government area of Sokoto State and the one in Cross River State, INEC was prevented from deploying to certain polling units. As a result, elections could not hold in those polling units. And if INEC is not under a security organization, if you are prevented, other agencies, other apparatus of state have responsibilities for different aspects of the process. INEC is to print ballot papers, print the register of voters, give them cards, and then come out, set out the things, and people come and vote. And that, it was not found wanting at all. In Imo State, the election was conducted in accordance with the regulations, accordance with the guidelines, and in accordance with the law. And it got to the collation stage. Elections had been concluded, so you have to collate the results and announce a winner. But at the collation stage, thugs, I would say, invaded the collation center, snatched materials, destroyed materials. Fine. So that was the third. And the 4th one was exactly the same thing. We were prevented. There were some acts of violence. Apparently, things were not going the way that we wanted. In Akwa Ibom State, our officials, mind you, our officials were taken from where they were supposed to go to their polling unit. They were kidnapped and taken to a non-designated place, and they were being made to compelled to do what we're not supposed to be doing. And they cried out. But looking at all 4 incidences, we saw, look, apart from Imo, we went ahead and conducted election, concluded election, because the places affected, the violence or the disruption was not so widespread, so that we could conclude the process, and the process was concluded. I don't think that's a particularly bad average. I don't think there's anything there that can attribute to the fault of the Commission, INEC.
Thank you for those clarifications, because it does take a sort of concerted efforts to hold an election. So you have now explained the part that INEC is responsible for and has no control over the other aspects. Now, going by the statement given by one of your officials in Akwa Ibom, he actually praised the conduct of the security agencies. So if it's not an INEC issue, these problems that we're seeing, and it's not the security agencies, we now have to look at the conduct of the political parties. While INEC has no control over these people and their attitudes and the behavior that they exhibit, the buck tends to stop with INEC because of your name, Independent National Electoral Commission. So what can INEC really do now? Because Dr. Abati used the word overwhelmed, which you rejected, but what about the word hamstrung? To what extent are you restricted when the political actors exhibit this kind of, frankly, appalling behavior?
Well, I don't know that I'm not a student of English, so I really don't know whether one is not a synonym of the other. But
no, it's not. To be hamstrung is restricted.
I think you. I thought so too. We're encapsulated in certain ways. Everybody is. Look, there's division of labor in everything that we do. And the Constitution, which establishes so many bodies, establishes the INEC and states its role in a process. It also establishes the armed forces, the police, and other agencies of state and gives them responsibilities, gives them roles. And each has to do its own part. It also established or made a framework for the existence of political parties and contestation for offices. Now, it expects everybody to act in accordance with rules and guidelines that are established by the Constitution itself and by acts of the National Assembly. Regrettably, not everybody does what they're supposed to do on election day or on a daily basis. In order to coordinate security is a primary responsibility of security agencies, and we realize that it can impact on our work. There are interdependencies between all these agencies. If the security agencies don't do their work right, it will impact on our work, and we cannot conduct proper, free, credible elections if, for example, in an atmosphere of threats, violence, and such like. So yes, everybody has their own responsibility. The political class, I think there are short-term, medium-term, maybe long-term goals as to getting out of the woods in this regards. And yes, the resident electoral commissioner did praise segments of the security agencies. They did a fantastic job. But the fact that in certain areas there were either lapses of security or conflicting issues or people in uniforms, some people call them fake policemen, fake security men, are able to subvert the process is still a very worrisome thing. It shows that we still have a long way to go. But the primary people who do these things are the political class, certain aspects of the political class, who insist, rather than waiting, sovereignty belongs to the people in a democracy, rather than waiting for the people to express that will by way of elections, they go ahead to try to subvert the will of the people. I think we must stem that. Impunity is a real problem. INEC has responsibility to prosecute electoral offences, but the security agencies, the police, and the Ministry of Justice has responsibility to prosecute other offences in other that fall under penal provisions in other laws. We can prosecute, but we have no powers to arrest. We have no powers to investigate. So we are the forefront. INEC is at the forefront of saying maybe you take that responsibility of prosecution and give it to one agency, maybe a new agency, maybe the existing agency within the existing framework, or you create an Electoral Offenders Commission, which will have powers to arrest, it will have powers to investigate, and it will have powers to prosecute any electoral offences. That may be a starting point, apart from voter education, trying to enlighten citizens, trying to enlighten the change the mindset of the political class, but also we couple that with checking the impunity, because if more people are prosecuted, if more important, better known people, the higher up the value chain are prosecuted, perhaps we'll begin to see a change in attitudes and a change in the way they do things.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we all know something has to be done. The situation doesn't seem to change. And election by election, something always happens. And like Tundun said, it's multifaceted. It's not just INEC, right? But here we are in situations where INEC are the ones that really get the blame for the public. When giving the judgment on this particular case in Imo State, Justice Kekere-Ekun said in quotes, his election was void and illegal, right? Now, this is a heavy statement that comes and falls on a body like like INEC, an independent institution. So I want to ask you how situations like this that occur, judgments that are given like this, then affect INEC as an institution, because that entire word independence is so important. And it looks as though the time has come where maybe as an independent body, INEC needs to challenge the Constitution over manual collation, because that may be the bottom line here when we talk about how to really clean up the rotten electoral system.
I've read the judgment of the Supreme Court and Kekerekun. Quite honestly, I may have missed that where she's attributed to have said that the election was void. If it was, I doubt that if she said, if Milord said the election was void, then it would not have made a return. It's either election was good or it's bad, or it's bad in places. But when you see read the judgments of the, it's predicated on the evidence adduced before the court, and they make an assessment based on that evidence. Often, it is exactly what happened in the field, but sometimes what is adduced in court does not necessarily reflect exactly what happened in the field. But the judges were not there. The justices of the Supreme Court were not on the field, so they cannot take personal notice of what happened in the field. So it's the evidence produced in court. And very often, some people who are victims in the field may or may not go to court. If you don't go to court to testify, then you are left with just the evidence of the few people who turn up in court. So sometimes in court, it's not the whole picture of what actually transpired. And let's not lose sight of one thing. Very often, especially in terms of violence and disruption, INEC officials are at the forefront of this. They're in the front lines, and they're very much victims. On Saturday in Akwa Ibom State, I think ACM local government, it was our officials that were hijacked, permanent and non-permanent staff, young youth corpers who have volunteered to serve their nation. And they're hijacked and they're at risk. In quite a number of elections, we have had permanent ad hoc staff falling victims of kidnapping, abduction, of violence, and even death. I have a Mr. Makri in Rivers State in 2019 elections who actually died. She's an ad hoc staff. She had a young family, young children, and a husband still living. We had Dumio Konta, similar in Rivers in the rerun elections in 2018, who was killed. So in Benue State, a professor that we're using as an ad hoc official was shot at. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal, but at least she was wounded and had to spend months in hospital, and she has never fully recovered. So basically, our officials are the front line. So we are very concerned about this violence. So it's not as if we just sit down and expose ourselves deliberately. Sometimes those who are charged with protecting the lives and properties of the voters, of the media people, of the observers, and NEC officials sometimes are found wanted, because there are people who are...
just a moment, Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi, if I may interrupt you, we'll need to take a short commercial break. When we return, the conversation would continue. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News Channel. Still with us in our Abuja studio is Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi, Director of Voter Education and Publicity, the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria. Oluwole, welcome back to the morning show. Well, before we go ahead, maybe I should just add something to the question that Leila had raised about the Supreme Court verdict in the Imo State gubernatorial election. I mean, after the judgment was published, many Nigerians, either people who have political affiliation or even lawyers who have studied the judgment, they've concluded that one thing that stands out in that ruling is that, in fact, it was a failure of INEC, the lack of due diligence on the part of INEC that created the basis for the kind of ruling that the Supreme Court gave in that particular matter. And in today's edition of This Day, I would just like to quote for your attention a paragraph from a review by Femi Falana SAN. I'll be very quick about it. It says, it was our ladyship's view that the failure of INEC to prove the allegations contained in its pleading that the results in the 388 polling units were fake or forged was fatal to the case of the respondents. More so that INEC had pleaded that the genuine results will be produced at the trial, which it never did. Thus, she held that the authorities of this court, requiring the evidence of polling unit agents, polling unit by polling unit are therefore not applicable in these circumstances. At the end of the day, it was a deputy commissioner of police who was presenting collated results that have been, to use the judge's expression, unlawful exclusion of votes. But you insist that INEC should not be blamed. But out there, most people think it's INEC that caused the problem. What do you think? What's your reaction?
Well, yeah. Yes, I am not one to challenge the Supreme Court, as it were. They are infallible. They are infallible only because they are final. Their infallibility is dependent, is conditional, is predicated on their finality. The Supreme Court has pronounced we all as Democrats, as people who have subscribed to the Constitution of Nigeria, must comply, obey, and move on along the lines that the Supreme Court has said. But you'll see that if you look critically, you will see there are differing opinions by experienced counsel. I've read the judgment, and in certain ways, I think that the Supreme Court departed from quite a number of their previous decisions. For example, that a long line of Supreme Court cases have said, look, where you allege there's an allegation about what happened in the polling unit, you must call an agent who was in each and every polling unit. That was not done in this case. Now, we pleaded generally that, look, we have genuine results, and genuine results were the ones we declared. In all those 388 polling units, our contention was that there were no results. We refused to take any results because the process was disrupted. And if you read the judgment, if you read the pleadings, if you read the evidence, you'll see that INEC called evidence to show that because of disruption, certain unit results were not accepted. The results cannot come. The result is an end product of a process. There must be accreditation, there must be voting, there must be sorting, counting, and announcement of results in every polling unit. We say that these were not done, where the violence stopped the commission from deploying to these units, or in some of those units where we deployed to, the process was disrupted. As a result, no election took place. And if no election took place, no result can come out of that place. Now, I think we had some fine lawyers who defended the commission in that case. The PDP had some very, very fantastic lawyers, amongst the best in election petition matters in this country. They took the approach that they did, but the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, has decided, and that puts an end to it. We'll study the judgment, see if there are any lapses in terms of procedure, not necessarily presentation in the court. So that is a discretion you give to the lawyer handling your matter. But in terms of procedure, actions on the field, we have to go back, study the judgment, and see. And if anybody is found culpable, we dealt with administratively. If we think our procedures were okay, fine. We'll do all we can so that in future there will be no repetition of what happened. But look at what happened right from the very beginning that led to this. Disruption of the process. That's the pleadings of the case. Only one person out of 4, 5 other candidates, only one person said that the elections took place in all these 300-something polling units. All different parties agree that these elections were disrupted in all these units. But as I said, the Supreme Court decided on the pleadings and the evidence laid in the court. So that may not necessarily reflect truly what transpired outside of the courtroom and on the field on the day of election.
Thank you, sir. Before I ask you my question, I just want to confirm that all the abducted INEC officials from the elections have been released. Can you confirm that, sir? Well, we hope they're safe now.
Yes. Fortunately, all the abducted, kidnapped officials are safe this time around.
Thank God for that.
Thank you.
So to my question, Nigeria has now slipped to 146th, according to Transparency International, based on the perception of corruption. And they cited several factors. They talked even about lack of adherence or a lack of uniform adherence to the rule of law. They talked about clamp down on the media and civil society organizations and political corruption. They specifically went into the behavior of politicians and political parties. As we've established, INEC can only control so much. But the Electoral Act gives INEC certain powers under Section 91 to try and turn down this boil to a simmer so that there's not this crazy zero-sum game. You know, the stakes are too high. When people have invested billions, this is when they go around doing criminality like kidnapping, murder, even of INEC officials, much less their political opponents. So how can INEC really strengthen the adherence to those sections of the Electoral Act that dictate exactly how much political parties can spend for presidential, governorship, elections, and House of Reps and what have you? Because we all know that parties probably do not toe the line there.
Yes, indeed. Let me, first of all, in answering your question, say quite quickly that INEC is a regulatory and a management body akin to the central bank in certain ways, but it's a very, very weak. It's the weakest of the regulatory bodies we have established by the Constitution. It's hamstrung this time around. I will agree with that word. It's hamstrung in what it can do because the law has specified what it can do, and what powers it has not been given, it cannot go beyond that, cannot take, go outside the powers specifically granted to it. Now, if there's a breach of Section 91, what it can do is get the investigative bodies to investigate and pass the case file onto the commission if prima facie evidence has been established that a crime or the candidate has expended more than the law allows that candidate to expend, in which case that person will be prosecuted. But it cannot investigate it. And secondly, Section 91 deals with candidates, not political parties. Candidate expenditure. And it defines that as to from the time, expenses from time notice of election is given up till polling day, and excludes certain things like the cost of nomination fees. You don't add those kind of things. Now, you know, in our society, which is a cash-based society, in as much as efforts have been made to make it put trailers on cash, on money spent, we still depend very, very much on cash, a lot of cash transactions. Unfortunately, I don't have the figures of central bank now about how much cash is in circulation, how much cash transactions are being done rather than electronic means of transferring money or spending money. There is a challenge of the investigation and prosecution of such things. And secondly, you have people who come and they go to their mosques, they go to their churches and donate millions of naira. They establish a foundation and say, this is the Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi Foundation. And it gives out money, it gives out washing machines, it gives out trailers, wheelbarrows, all sorts of things. And say, I'm doing charity, sinks boreholes in places. Now, some of those people have an end in mind. They'll tell you, oh, I'm just a philanthropist. But at the same time, next 3 months, you see them picking forms to contest elections. Now, you cannot bring in those monies that are spent because those monies are spent by a foundation for charitable purposes, for philanthropic purposes. But it says, but it's name recognition. And as you said, it's a zero game sum. Now, the law says it's what you spend on campaigns, what you spend for the political purpose. Now, can you say that that money was spent in trying to get into office? The law recognizes that you must spend money. You must get party agents or polling agents or candidate agents at all levels. But it doesn't envisage that you'll spend in a corruptive way, that you'll induce voters, that you induce delegates at your primaries and things like that. But monies that you spend on billboards, on media campaigns and stuff are all part of it and say, elect me, or I'm interested in this position. But sometimes it's a gray area between money spent otherwise and money spent directly on it. And looking through the books, you will not see some of these things because they are cash expenditure, not checks, not ATMs or through banks. So there's a problem. That's why we are collaborating with the EFCC and ICPC. Now, you can help us in this regard. You have the capacity, the capabilities, and the technical know-how to track movement of money. So once you track one that is supposed to be for a political purpose, then investigations can continue and let's see whether this is, and when you tabulate all that, you see whether the person has used that money for political campaigns and whether it exceeds the limit. These are some of the challenges that we have in ensuring that Section 91 will give life.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Chinks again.
Very nice, yes.